my father's Jewish and my mother happens to be Scottish, so I've got a kind of fucked up attitude to money.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you had an integral...
And alcohol.
Yeah, as well. Yeah. But the first question then is just about money.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of wondering, do you have an integral perspective on money?
Yeah, it's good.
That's it? Thank you.
Well, there was a, that's a classical Suzuki Roshi, wonderful sort of Zen teaching from him. And this was in the 60s, when Jewish or not, money was an issue. And it was felt to be, of course, like so often the case with a puritanical ascending notion, money was bad. So a young man was due to marry was a student of Zen, a student of Suzuki Roshi, was set to marry a somewhat wealthy young woman. And he was concerned, of course, that this would mess up his spiritual practice. The money, not the woman. So he talked to Suzuki and said just that. I'm getting married. I'm worried. I don't want to be, attached to money, and it would be awful. And Suzuki Roshi said, "Oh yes, to be attached to wealth is a terrible thing." He had said, "Yeah, I know." And Suzuki Roshi said, "To be attached to poverty is also a terrible thing." And he thought for a while, and he goes, "Okay, I understand." So Suzuki Roshi said, "Good, now that you understand, it's better to be rich." So the secret there is getting on the other side of attachment. And so and that does take often some kind of work. I mean, if you really do have an attachment to money or anything, and it's a real attachment in the sense that it's something that has become part of your self-identity. And under those circumstances, it has to be fasted, it has to be transcended. And there are ways to deal with that using both meditative techniques and psychotherapeutic techniques. But if it's something that really is an issue, then it's something that is worth looking into. The tricky part, and this goes for money, sex, power, Jaguar cars, I mean, seriously, anything. Once the attachment is truly broken, but this is where the deception can come in. If that happens on the way up and you actually can disidentify with it, then on the way down, you can inhabit it with radiance as a vehicle to use. And under those circumstances, particularly in this culture, where money, for example, is a means of accomplishing goals, it's a means of getting something done, then not to inhabit money with a great deal of intelligence is pretty silly, actually. So an integral view of money is, as in almost any of these things, is to go ahead and do whatever practices deal with that attachment to it. And then to the extent that you do that, then it can actually be re-inhabited. You have to be careful about that. One of the things that Trungpa Rinpoche used to do when they would have Vajrayana seminaries is that for the first month, you had to do Hinayana. Now that meant you couldn't smoke, you couldn't drink, no sex, as far as I could spot. But it really was a no joking period. You actually had to stop now stopping smoking for people was very hard for even a week or two. So to go a month without smoking is going to pretty much put a dent in that. And once you did that, then you did a month of Mahayana. You're still really not smoking or anything, but you're doing taking and sending practice. You're doing Tonglen. You're working your way into whatever feelings of craving or still uncomfortableness can come up from breaking the attachment. And you're using it as a way to relate to all others who are suffering. Once you've done that, then the third month is Vajrayana, and then you're allowed to do everything. And everybody used to there is more sex going on within 3 days than you can imagine. And I think a lot of cigarettes were had after sex. But you still had to go through the beginning part. And even if you're still kidding yourself a little bit, you were given conditions to see whether you were kidding yourself or not, because you had to stop it. So that's the generic formula, whether you actually do it that way or not. The generic formula is break the attachment, and then if you want to use it, then you can inhabit it as a means of expression of awakened awareness. And that's the whole point behind transmuting the 5 negative emotions into their 5 wisdoms and actually using them. And it's a Vajrayana technique, but again, you'll notice in virtually all the schools of Vajrayana, including the Nyingmapa, where they have the 9 yanas, it's the same version of what Trungpa did. The first 3 of them, Vipassana, Shamatha, and following all the rules, all the 107 rules to get started of what you can't do. And all the rules in the paths of renunciation are not suggestions on what you can do. They're a list of what you can't do. And once you get through those, then you get to the higher tantras, and then you introduce sexuality, and then you introduce Dzogchen. So it's a pretty standard way of dealing with it. But money per se is not bad. Dedicating your vocational work to working with money is not bad. So you don't want to go between that extreme of, well, I don't want, get away from money, I'm going to have nothing to do with it. Now, you should inhabit it with radiance instead of attachment, and then go for it. And you've got Jewish genes working for you. Yeah. Okay.